All right, so welcome again. And a reminder, 3CREN is the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, and that is a collaboration between three neighboring counties that you see on your screen. And we are able to offer ratepayer funds to offer free services to support energy efficiency in our region. And so we have services to support building professionals and residents and homeowners. Next slide, please. We offer these services through three discrete programs, and I work on our home energy savings program. So I'm happy to connect with you further if you have any questions about energy upgrades, both for a single family home or a multifamily property within the Tri-County region. So our program to support single family program home energy upgrades is something that I work on regularly. And basically, we're just able to offer discounted pricing for a program for projects that save you energy in your home. And we're able to do so by paying incentives to contractors. So basically, from your perspective, as long as you work with a contractor that is enrolled with our program and you do a project that saves you energy, you're likely to be able to access our incentive dollars that bring down the cost of those upgrades. So, as Anne talks about electrification projects shortly, quite a few of our projects that have come through our program are heat pump projects and a great chance to apply the program. Next slide. So when you're thinking of how much can you really save with incentives, you might have a bit of sticker shock, but there is quite a bit of money out there. So just some examples. So the program that I manage, a typical rebate for a electric heat pump is in the range of $2,000, sometimes $3,000 or more. There is a state program that offers an incentive for $1,000. There's a tax credit for $2,000 for heat pumps, for a total estimated savings of around $5,000. So that's nearly half off of a $12,000 project. I would like to mention that core to 3CREN's existence is serving hard to reach customers. So these are lower income folks or people that live in mobile homes are eligible for discounted rates. And just teasing quickly that our incentives are roughly tripled for folks that meet certain criteria. So with that in mind, I think I'm ready to pass it over to Anne. As you're thinking about what you might be able to access, we do have a neat tool on our website, the Incentive Finder, and I can put that link in the chat as well. And you can also get direct support by calling our associate at the number on the screen or emailing him directly. His name is Juan, and he can help walk you through all of the incentives in the region. Okay, over to you, Anne.
Great. Thank you, April. That was a great intro and hopefully get people salivating for those incentives. We love to be incentivized to do things that we might want to do anyway. So that's pretty cool. So good morning, or I guess it's afternoon now, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. The idea here is there are a ton of reasons why people may want to make improvements to their home, and it's the ideal time to make some efficiency upgrades and electrify your home. And I'll certainly talk about what do I mean by electrify and go through some examples of other efficiency improvements as well. So why are we interested in doing those all together? That is the question. I'm on my laptop today, and it's not always super cooperative. I was telling April earlier that my desktop computer died a couple of days ago, so I'm kind of limping along here. Bear with me. So the topics we're going to cover today are listed here. So we'll talk a little bit about the situation that remodeling puts homeowners in, and including sort of the more larger social context, defining high performance, why that's a concept that is of interest. There are benefits associated. What I refer to as the high performance toolkit, like what does that mean? What are we playing with when we're talking about making performance improvements? The planning process, sort of working through a project methodically, and particularly working with your team. A little bit about specific electric equipment options you have available, and then just a final wrap up with resources, including incentive links. So you've already heard those from April. We'll just keep hammering you guys with the idea that there's money out there to be taken advantage of from many sources. Okay, so starting with the situation, and starting with a relatively big picture, presumably, oops, here we go. Most of you, if not all of you, are in California, and California is pretty unique in terms of policy goals related to climate. Among others, the two of the big ones you can see at the top, there are two major ambitious goals that the state has established for the year 2045. First of all, that we will have a zero carbon electricity supply. And secondly, that we will have a carbon neutral state throughout the economy. So that implies certainly that we're no longer going to be relying on fossil fuels at all, or that if we are, it'll be to a very limited extent, and we will have means available by 2045 to counterbalance whatever carbon or greenhouse gas emissions may be associated with any remaining fossil fuel use. So what that implies for us who live in homes, most of us all live in homes, is that we're going to see the end to natural gas in our lifetimes. And there are several reasons for this. The first one, of course, again, is climate related. And it's only recently been fully appreciated that natural gas, which was once promoted widely as a clean fuel, is actually not clean. In fact, that when we account for leaks in lines, it's as polluting as coal. So it's no longer the fuel of choice for a clean energy future with a planet that's habitable for ourselves and our children and grandchildren, nieces and nephews, and future generations. It is actually a very undesirable fuel. So, and because of that, we now have energy code changes that are incentivizing building decarbonization, which is a term that has become more or less, maybe not technically, but more or less synonymous with electrifying buildings. So we won't go into the fine distinctions there. And then there's also the fact that already there are more than 70, I think we might be up to 75 or 76 local jurisdictions within the state that already have either mandates or incentives in place for all electric new home construction. But what that means is not very far behind is the concern for all local communities of transitioning all existing homes to all electric. It's a much bigger nut to crack, and it's going to take a lot of effort at all levels of government, as well as individual households, to make that a reality. But it's very much in the gonna happen pipeline. So that's a big picture context about, all right, so you want to remodel, what might you consider doing with that all in mind? So electrification is what I would say for me, the number one so-called high performance goal to keep in mind with a home improvement project. And many of you may have undertaken home improvement projects in the past. You probably already know that those are challenging. But what we're talking about is layering on additional issues sort of beyond what the normal workforce and certainly the average homeowner is accustomed to dealing with. In the realm of high performance, in addition to electrification, there are energy efficiency improvements, which, as commonplace as that may sound, there's not a high level of I say execution that is typical within the building industry. So we're really looking to improve the overall performance across all sorts of parameters. And I'll give a very high level overview of some of those in the rest of the presentation. Also, we can elevate the importance of comfort, health in the home, and resiliency. And certainly these are things that, let's say you try to engage a general contractor to work on a project and you say, I'm concerned about health. I'd like to improve my family's comfort. I'd like a more resilient home. Most likely, you're going to get some blank looks, or you might not hear back from a contractor if you use language like that, because they're most comfortable doing work that they're very, very familiar with, as are we all, right? So part of this is about how do we address the fact that we have a workforce that isn't necessarily really very well versed in some of these topics, and are not necessarily engaged in continuing education that would keep them up to speed on this. So we're layering all this on top of what might be a more normal project involving architectural, spatial improvements, or other types of home maintenance or upgrades. So what happens then? Often there are some hiccups. And one of these is, as homeowners, most of folks do not have experience in the driver's seat doing these types of projects, particularly a major remodel where that may be a once in a lifetime project. And so it's not something you're going to be an expert in doing. And then again, we're talking about, well, maybe layering on top some things where the folks you're working with also may not have a lot of familiarity with this work. So what that means is it could be really challenging to put together the type of team you might want to accomplish the type of work that could be of interest. So, and then there's this factor that notwithstanding the fact that most of the industry isn't focused on high performance work, there are some who do. They're typically really very forward thinking, energetic people who are excited and inspired about their work they're doing. They have no trouble finding work. They tend to have long waiting lists. So it's rather difficult to assemble one of these teams. And you might then ask, okay, well, you're kind of discouraging me here. Why would I bother? So the why bother is the topic of this next section, where I'm going to say more about what do we mean about high performance and the benefits that it carries along with it. So I've borrowed the bulk of this definition from a very well-established, prestigious organization that's based in the Boston area called Building Science Corporation. They've been doing work, among others, for the U.S. Department of Energy for decades, and have really sort of stepped out in front, have done a lot of education across the industry, including with people like myself who learned from Building Science Corp staff going back again, well, let's say, again, multiple decades. I think I first met Building Science Corp folks literally about 30 years ago, and continue to rely on them for cutting edge knowledge and knowledge sharing. So they define high performance as a building that exceeds the performance of conventional buildings in important ways, which I've listed below. So along with the attendant benefits. So, and this is this very compressed list, but obviously conserving energy, a more energy efficient home can reduce utility costs. A more durable home can reduce maintenance costs. Comfort improves satisfaction. Just a comment about this, over the many decades of working in the building industry, I worked with a lot of families on home improvement projects. And one of the things that eventually dawned on me was that a lot of folks sort of view their home's behavior, particularly as regards comfort, as sort of like a living creature, a pet, or a wayward teenager, where you might love it, it's part of the family, but you don't really have great control over its behavior. So I don't know why this room over here is always cold while this one over there is boiling hot. There's a draft we can't control in this one place, so we just avoid sitting in that area. There are all kinds of comfort issues that people often sort of learn to ignore and might not raise in a conversation about a home improvement project because it doesn't occur to you that this is a behavior that might be able to be changed. And in fact, virtually all comfort issues in homes can be remedied with the right expertise. So it's definitely a worthwhile topic to raise in the context of an improvement project. And it is one of the benefits that can be delivered by a high performance approach to improving your home. Indoor air quality can improve health, and I've got a little bit more about that later on in the deck. And then, of course, climate responsiveness. So who doesn't want to do the responsible thing, again, in terms of making a mark for future generations? So it's generally these things go together. We accomplish them often by doing the very same things. It will accomplish all of these things at once. So that's another thing to keep in mind. It's not like, oh my gosh, I have a whole checklist for energy, another checklist for durability, another one for comfort. Actually, it's mostly sort of the same checklist when you work again with knowledgeable high performance building professionals. So off we go. And again, you'll see I'm concluding this slide with a reminder once again that an all-electric home is a cornerstone of high performance. So what do we mean by all-electric? We're talking about, in a typical home, swapping out what we refer to as the big four gas equipment items. So that's space heating, so a gas furnace typically, a water heater, a kitchen range or cooktop that is often gas, and frequently gas clothes dryers. Now, some homes may only have one or two of these or three, but all four is a very, very common configuration, particularly in California. And then, of course, there are also quite a few homes that may have other items that are also running on gas. They tend to be, well, except for pools. Pools can actually be the biggest energy and fuel user of all of these if you have a pool. But because it's not as common, I won't be spending a lot of time on it, but didn't want to overlook that. Okay, so electrification alone on that list of high performance has a ton of benefits. So what do you get when you eliminate gas and switch to electricity? You're reducing the risk of on-site explosions, which has I think something that's not very well known. I think most people in California are aware of the big explosion in San Bruno that took many lives in many homes a decade or more ago. But what's less known is that there are gas line related explosions all over the country with really remarkable and kind of horrifying frequency. So this is not a big thing, or it's not a trivial thing. It is major, and it's worth considering the risk. We're also getting improved equipment. So new electric equipment items that fulfill the same functions as the gas ones that we're eliminating typically have lots of improved features. We're also talking about avoiding increases in gas prices. And note the little bubble here that we found as a result of research that the state of California itself funded that gas rates are likely to close to double by 2050. I think we've got somebody who's non-muted. I'm hearing a little bit of background noise. Okay, let's see. And then we're also reducing safety risks in the kitchen because with the adoption of induction cooking, because those appliances are far safer. And I may have I do. I have a slide where I can talk quite a bit more about that because I'm actually really excited about induction ranges. I have one and we'll never go back. And then finally, we're also reducing indoor air pollution. And again, that has a huge health benefit, both for occupants, and then there's sort of the global air pollution benefit, of course, of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from burning all of those fossil fuels in homes throughout California and beyond. Okay, so when we're talking about gas cooking hazards, I've got some research here that I'm showing just as a snapshot. There's a lot of reference material on this. I've given some URLs at the bottom of the page here, so you can dig into this a little bit more if you're interested in finding out more or just understanding the magnitude of the concerns and looking at credible resources. So nitrogen dioxide emissions are one of the dangers that we face from cooking with gas in our kitchens. And then this is just an illustration of some of the types of health problems that can arise in children in particular as a result of exposure to the emissions from gas stoves. So without going into the fine print here, I find this one is really the most persuasive argument for people who have any reluctance in terms of adopting electric cooking, because well, that probably needs no further explanation. We all want our children to grow up strong and healthy. Okay. Oh, and by the way, so nitrogen dioxide is only one of several byproducts of gas cooking. I've just chosen this illustration, but again, this reference document from the Rocky Mountain Institute, rmi.org, tells you quite a bit more about some of the additional pollutants produced in the process and some of the health impacts of those pollutants as well. Okay, and so, all right, so that might explain why electrification is great and why are we bundling it in this concept of high performance. So it's not just about climate, but when we switch, or let's say we fail to switch from gas to electricity, or sorry, my brain is not 100% organized around this. Obviously, I'm partnering this idea of switching fuels while simultaneously addressing other performance issues, and why we talk about them together, which I mentioned earlier. So these are sort of companion concepts. And this is just one example. So if we don't address performance, we can be sort of dooming ourselves to buying a larger heating, ventilation, air cooling units than we would otherwise need. So we're spending more money on that. Along with that comes higher ongoing utility bills, and we're leaving potential comfort, indoor air quality, and condensation risks unaddressed. So when we instead do upgrade performance at the same time as we electrify, we're looking at activities like the ones shown in the box on the left of improving the quantity as well as the quality of installing our insulation. We're looking at sealing the house very well. We're potentially going to look at how to make lighting and appliances more efficient, and also improving efficiency of distribution systems, distribution of air that we're using to heat and cool ourselves, distribution of hot water are the two biggest examples. And all of those variables influence the aspects of performance shown on the right. And again, what you're seeing is, oh, there's this intimate relationship between what we do to the house and the outcomes that are all related, once again, to both electrification and performance. Now, I hope that's clear, and hopefully it'll become a little bit more clear also as I get into some more details. Electrification doesn't necessarily imply that we will have a renewable energy system or energy storage system. However, they're often looked at together. These are also companion concepts and companion features to consider in a home improvement project. So adding renewable energy improves our resiliency in a number of ways. You're seeing, we'll say, savings over time, because having a renewable energy system brings down the cost of our month in, month out utility bills. There's also increased resale value for homes that have solar. And of course, it's clean carbon-free energy, which is always grand. Adding batteries into that equation means we're becoming more resilient with the ability to continue function during power outages, but also resiliency for the greater grid. And because of that improved resiliency for the grid, which is a primary consideration for the state, that means there are policies in place that improve the economics of solar with the inclusion of batteries. So if you're looking into getting solar, what you're going to find is if you ask for a bid that includes both solar and battery, you're going to see that the return on investment is more attractive with both than with just solar. And then along with that, again, the ability to utilize a battery, not just in the event of outages, but in a routine way, you can control the batteries so that you can store excess solar energy during the day and then utilize that during our peak cost energy periods in the evening between 4 and 9 p.m., bringing your costs down during those periods. So all that is why you'll see incentives for batteries as well as incentives for solar. So all of that package results in a resilient and more climate-friendly home. Okay, deep breath. April, do we have any questions so far?
I think we can keep going.
Keep rolling? Okay. All right. We will definitely take questions at the end. So yeah, I usually will pause if anything seems like it needs clarification, and otherwise questions might be something that we cover in the next few minutes. So the toolkit. What do I mean by the high performance toolkit? So there are parts of the toolkit. The first part of that is the enclosure elements. And this is not a fabulous illustration, but it, I think, carries the message. What do we mean by enclosure? We're talking about the roof, the walls, doors, windows, and the foundation, all of which together is called either the building envelope or building enclosure. And so each one of those we can do things to improve performance. Similarly, the electrical items are another package of things. And in the electrical bucket, we've got lighting, appliances, and electronics. Again, with opportunities to improve all of those. Now, electronics aren't really home equipment, but we have a lot of electronics in our homes. And this third resource I'm showing in the red box and upper right, marketplace.pge.com, actually has terrific information on most efficient lighting appliances and electronics. So I like to give you that resource to look at. And the illustration below that box shows you how they rate various equipment items. So they've got a numeric score in the little green circle, and that's a score of 0 to 100. And then you'll see rebate information, price information, ratings that they gather across retailers. And you can actually shop directly from this site. And what I really like about this is it's got a terrific search engine. They keep it very up to date. And you can, one of the features in the search engine that I use a lot is to say, well, if I'm looking for an item, let's say I'm interested in a new stove, right? I can put in a number of parameters, including that I'm only interested in looking at results that have a score of 90 or above, because for me, energy performance is a paramount consideration. So another feature that's really, really handy for refrigerators in particular is you can put in size parameters. So a lot of other appliances are pretty standard as to sizes. Refrigerators are all over the map. And so if you have an existing home and you have, X amount of space for it, you're going to be very limited in what you can choose sometimes. I mean, you might have a great, huge amount of space, and you need to fill it, or you might have very tight space. So it's really useful to be able to say, put in ranges of sizes that you can look at. So really, really useful resources here. And all those, again, are items you can consider for overall improvements. And these are the easy ones too, right? These are things that plug in and out. The next bucket of equipment items in the performance toolkit is the HVAC family, heating, ventilating, air conditioning, along with water heating. This is sort of the heavy duty building systems, and got just examples of the typical pieces of this toolkit here. So I want to just point out and emphasize that in addition to the boxes, as we call them, the heat pump box or the water heater box or the furnace box that hopefully you'll be replacing, there is the ductwork, which is a distribution system. And we can get sometimes pretty substantial improvements in performance of systems overall just through improvements in distribution. And so ductwork is a great one to consider, like, wow, I mean, that's something most of us don't ever think about. And they can be pretty seriously defective and have major impacts on both efficiency and comfort. And sometimes there are also related durability issues that are maybe hidden problems. Okay, this one is one of my favorites. A big part of the toolkit isn't a thing, it's a how. It's not a what, it's a how. It's how things are installed. And this is, I would say, kind of the neglected stepchild of most home improvement work across the board, is just really not realizing how important it is that we test, measure, and verify performance across a variety of systems. So all the ones I've mentioned, air sealing, most of us live in houses that were never actually air sealed because air sealing wasn't even really recognized as much of a factor in performance until I'm going to say 20 years ago. And to be honest, it's now well recognized in the energy community, but it is still not getting the attention that it is due in the trades, I think. And I'll have a little bit more to say about that. Insulation, flashings, all the components of mechanical systems and hot water piping, all of these have certain performance metrics that can and should be met and that are rarely examined. And you'll see in the gray box at the bottom here that I've given you a link. That same link is at the end of this deck. And it says Builder Resource Guide, but what's terrific about this document is it's not only something that is going to be useful to any contractor or trade person you might work with. It's a very accessible document. And so I think it's a quick read. This is a short, I think it's maybe a 30 or so page document, and a lot of which is additional resources and illustrations. So it's not a heavy lift to give this a scan and just become aware of resources that might be available to share with anyone in the building industry that you might be working with. Okay, so overall comment about all the performance tools is efficiency kind of underlies all of these. That's what we're looking for, is efficiency improvements. And the benefits of more efficient performance are numerous. So again, improved comfort. So what does that mean? Stable temperatures. And I think the most important piece of this is that when we do a really good job with enclosure efficiency, a house will remain comfortable even when the power's out. So no furnace, no heating, no air conditioning. A house will keep a stable temperature over a much longer period of time when the mechanical systems are down. And that can be a really important factor for any place that might experience extreme temperatures. That would be most of us in California these days experience extreme temperatures at some point or another during the year. And also for folks with any kind of health vulnerabilities. So the very old, the very young, people with health issues. So this is not to be looked at. Comfort sounds sort of like, oh, well, that's a nice to have. Actually, it can be a need to have. We can also improve resiliency to wildfire with the right features. And there are a ton of overlaps between wildfire protection and these other efficiency improvements. I actually teach a whole class on that, mostly for building professionals, but I have had homeowners attend that one as well. Again, lower all overall energy use. And of course, that means, again, lower utility costs, reduce intrusion of outdoor pollutants. So not just, say, wildfire smoke, but also noise, freeway, air pollution, all kinds of things. Cooking odors from a nearby residence, lots of benefits there. So covered those. Okay, so I mentioned that air sealing wasn't really recognized. And so I'm sort of starting at the bottom on this slide. So this is the guy, his outline, this is bare because there is no air sealing specialist. This is not an acknowledged trade. There's no one on a building team who is looked to as the air sealing specialist. I mean, we have one person in the state of California who calls himself an air sealing specialist, acronym ASS, which, this is how we amuse ourselves in this industry. At any rate, it's just an example of the fact that a high performance project, we're asking for familiarity with practices that are not standard across the board for the industry, and that one in particular. We're also asking oftentimes for a more demanding performance in terms of both design and specifications. So, and by specifications, I mean things like metrics we're looking for, or a more exacting choice in materials. And we're looking for exceptional attention to detail. High performance, I'd say, is a field really characterized by what I call the 100 silver BBs approach to solving a problem, as opposed to the one silver bullet. And that's frankly not something that most of the industry is really set up for. So we're looking to find that team that can take that approach. Okay. I have to keep my whistle wet here. So moving into the planning process. All right, so you're facing an improvement project, and yes, there's planning involved. So I've got a few steps that I recommend following. One, find out everything you can. And none of these sources may be available, but it's definitely worth poking around a little bit. So I've got the list on the top of who you might ask, where you might look, and then what might you be looking for. So if you can find any drawings, blueprints, any building permits that might be on record with your local building department. Sometimes older documents might be on microfiche. A lot of departments are digitizing. Some older records have just been disposed of, but it's worth asking. Title 24 energy reports, any diagnostic testing reports. And so what do I mean by diagnostic testing? So you may have encountered someone who did a blower door test for you, or duct blaster, or infrared camera work. That's not super common, but if it's been done, you probably know about it and you can dig out that information. Secondly, you want to check out your house. Imagine you're going to the doctor, your house is going to the doctor for its comprehensive annual checkup, or maybe it's in a super comprehensive 10-year checkup. So you want to look for all kinds of things. So stretching your mind beyond what you had in mind at the start when improving your home first crossed your mind. And, I mentioned the comfort issues before, but you want to also just take a really critical look around in all the nooks and crannies. Take pictures, take notes, look at all the things that might be very foreign to you, but you might notice things about them. I mentioned ductwork. You might take a look at your ductwork in an attic or a crawl space and think, oh, that's interesting. It looks like they're crushed in that spot, or some of the insulation seems to be missing. So you don't necessarily have to be an expert to spot issues that are worth raising in a conversation with whomever you might be working with about your project. So take a look at all these things and make a good record for yourself. Then think about the opportunities, the upside. What might you improve again that wasn't on your initial list? Comfort, that's on every list of mine because it is such a neglected issue, but also obvious visible things. Insulation defects is one of my favorites, and the photograph on the right shows a very poorly insulated attic, and you might think, oh, well, I see big fat puffs of insulation. How is that defective? And this, again, people teach whole classes on, but I'll just point out a couple of things. That the insulation is sort of a different height in a bunch of different spaces. And you'll see at the front edge of the photo, there's an area where you'll see no insulation, just wood. And in the back right-hand corner, you'll see sort of what looks like a bat or blanket of insulation that's stuck in vertically. And there's something black to the right of it, which looks like an area where there's no insulation. Similarly, in the back right corner, you can see that insulation bat poking up, a little corner sticking up, and then there's a little triangle where it just stops. Well, insulation should go all the way to the edge of the eaves in an attic. And it looks like that's kind of hard, so somebody just stopped there. You also see that the ducts are not buried in insulation, they're exposed. And although they themselves are insulated, they would be better insulated if they were covered with insulation. That means less heat or cold air, if you were air conditioning, would be escaping into the attic space where it's not doing anything helpful if it were buried. So that's just a little vignette, but there are potentials throughout many houses to correct all kinds of things. Air leakage, again, you may notice these as drafts, and there are also ways to test that. And certainly that's something, once you have some professionals on your team, to ask about air leakage testing, because it's another, again, very neglected topic and worthy of exploration. Windows are another often overlooked opportunity to improve performance, and whether they warrant replacement or refurbishment depends a lot on how old they are, what type they are, and what condition. And then shading opportunities. We have a lot of heat gain that comes through our windows, and that can be improved through both window coverings, exterior plantings, and sometimes exterior features. Mechanical system shortcomings, you're probably aware if you have some issues with your heating or cooling systems, or you may observe some things during your exploration phase. And then in a lot of homes, actually, this is my pet peeve in my house, is the lag time between when I turn on a hot water tap and when hot water arrives. I'm pretty convinced that the plumber here had a bunch of extra pipe and just decided to loop it around a few times, maybe loop it around the block, because it takes a ridiculous amount of time for hot water to arrive. And the hot water heater is not that far away from all the taps. So this is I have a project. I have to investigate why that is and see if I can get an on-demand water recirculation system installed. That's a fun project. Okay, so once you've sort of made your wish list of things that could be improved, then you should also think about all of the electrical things that might be in your future, and that you have already. So, and this is just a very quick illustration of some of the things to be thinking about. Oh, right. Yeah. Maybe 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, maybe my next car is going to be an EV. So that's an electrical item that should go on the list, because when you're making improvements, you actually want to make all the improvements you can that kind of work well together. So if any electrical work is in the cards for your project, then you want to be thinking about those. And then you want to prioritize the wish list. And that's just a, mental exercise. You will share it with your team. So we'll move on to that. Let's assume it's time to build a great team. Got a list of some folks that you might want to involve depending on the type of project. The most important thing I want to call out on this slide is experience, and preferably experience with high performance, with electrification, or a passion for those topics. And I want to emphasize, always check references. Don't just ask for references and get them and assume they're good, but check with them, follow them up, because sometimes there are surprises. What I've found is the most important things about putting a team together are that the members are all committed to the performance goals that you've established. They're creative. They're willing to go and ideally enthusiastic about going beyond just sort of business as usual, ordinary performance work, that they have the requisite experience, as I mentioned, and finally, that they play well with others. So they're not kind of lone wolf types who are like, well, I'm the plumber. I don't need to talk to anybody else. I'll just deal with the plumbing. No, ideally, because all our building systems interact with each other, you ideally want people who will collaborate and share their knowledge and coordinate. So super important. So once you have your team, you want to sit down with them and communicate with them, ideally all together in one room at one time, what your objectives are, and set specific metrics. This is just a list of, possible considerations. And I'm not going to go through all the words here. You'll be getting this slide deck as a PDF for future reference. So no need to memorize or jot down everything furiously. What your team should help you with to create a good plan. This is not the exhaustive list, but you want them to look at your existing electrical capacity. Think about what additional electrical capacity is going to be needed. Does that indicate, for example, that you might need a new electrical panel? Is an electrical panel going to prove problematic, either logistically, dealing with utility, or financially? If so, there are some, quote, diet or smart approaches that could be considered. So you want to walk through those, have them assist you in considering whether any of those will be helpful. And then also look at the whole list. Again, all the information you gathered about your house, all the potential improvements you looked at, all the future electrical items, and just do a mashup with all that information and help you really prioritize based on not only your own wants, but also whether there are particular synergies among the different things that interest you, or sometimes incompatibilities between certain things that might be on your list. So you're just sort of looking for the design and construction knowledge that comes with a professional team to augment your own wishes and information. And that's how a good team puts a good plan together. Quick rundown on the electric equipment options. We've got a bunch of sort of binary choices for all electric space heating and cooling in one box, one system. Huge advantage, particularly for homes that may have had a furnace and no cooling, and with those extreme heat events are now thinking, gosh, cooling could be a really nice thing. So it's either going to be a standard heat pump or a mini split heat pump. In the latter case, the mini split can be either ducted or ductless. The ductless look like this cassette shown on the wall in the left image. And some people say, oh, those are ugly. And I say, well, it's funny. We have a lot of ugly equipment in our houses. We kind of get used to them. But they tend to blend in somewhat. You'll stop seeing it after a while, or ducted. And again, for a smaller, more efficient home, certainly for new home, ducted mini splits are often a really great option. And you can see an example of a ducted installation on the right, pretty unobtrusive. For water heating, there's either a heat pump water heater, which is by far the most efficient option, generally about 3 times as efficient as the most efficient tankless water heater. It also has other advantages. One is that you're not going to have some delivery issues. Sometimes tankless units, if the water you want is only a little bit hotter than the water in the unit, it won't kick on and you won't get as hot as you want. They also tend to require a lot of amperage, a lot of capacity in an electrical panel. So these are things to trade off, and your building professionals can help you consider that. For cooking electric, most people don't want to go back to conventional range. I think it's important to point out that the newer induction range is also gas range, by the way. They all plug in. So it's really not about it's electric or not electric in terms of your cooking experience. The biggest thing that affects your cooking experience is the specific technology. And in the case of induction, that uses magnetism versus conventional, which uses conduction. So they behave quite differently and are generally much preferred, even by people who are pretty much diehard gas range advocates when they haven't yet experienced induction. So they're super responsive, much less likely to cause fires in the home or burn just because of the way they operate, where they're only heating the food in the pan and it's not really heating up your surface the way conduction range will. They cool off much faster. That's a short version. And then electric clothes dryers. This is the non-binary option where we've got a conventional electric dryer, condensing, and heat pump. And this is a little more complicated. You can see there are some distinct trade-offs among the 3 options. So it really depends. It's kind of a lifestyle choice. It can be a space choice. It can be an economic choice. And then this is not electric, but I do like to point out that solar clothes drying is also a very attractive option. Maybe not 100%. I probably dry about 50% of my clothes on clothesline and the other 50% in a conventional electric dryer. That's my choice. Okay, so that is the quick wrap up. Here is the summary slide of lots and lots of resources, and every single one of these, the PDFs, so the 4, the 2 on the left and the 2 on the right are all downloadable PDFs, and all of those have tons of other references within them. And yet none of them are long or really daunting documents. And then the 2 center resources will help you find incentives and contractors. As April mentioned earlier, theirs is the top. And I guess one sort of final footnote is that coming in 2024, you'll see California start to implement the federal incentives coming down through the Inflation Reduction Act, which are going to throw more money at a lot of these options and opportunities. So that is it for me. We've got a couple more slides from April, and then I'm happy to take questions. April, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. With 5 minutes left, let's just hop into questions here. But if folks need to hop off and you want to connect with a contractor that can help you with some of the items that Anne mentioned, I'll direct you to the link that I put in the chat at the beginning and is also on the screen. And as Anne mentioned, these resources will come to your inbox within the next week. Okay, we had one specific question here. What is the relationship between air sealing and fresh air / air changes per hour and radon exposure?
Okay, that's a multi-layered question. Okay, so air sealing and fresh air. So a lot of people think, well, doesn't your house need to breathe? Well, people need to breathe. Houses don't need to breathe. The trick is a house that isn't air sealed is getting fresh air, maybe. It's getting air from the outside from unknown sources. So, for example, to connect this to the air quality and radon issue, you may be getting air leaking in from below your house through the floor, and that air might be contaminated with radon. So that's one of the reasons that air sealing is super important. So ideally, you might test for radon, particularly if you're in a high radon risk area, and the test kits are available. They're either free or a very nominal cost. There are radon mitigation measures that are relatively easy to install, retrofit in a lot of houses, starting with sealing the soil underneath the house. So ideally, we want to be getting our fresh air from known sources in known quantity and known quality. So that's the short answer. And ideally, that might come from an active ventilation system, such as an energy recovery ventilator or a humidity recovery ventilator. No, heat recovery energy. HRV, heat recovery ventilator, ERV, energy recovery ventilator, and or just a balanced ventilation system. Most homes don't have those. A lot of it really depends on, a lot of people say, well, what about windows? Don't windows do a good job? They might. In coastal environments where probably a lot of you are from, and if you have no significant outdoor air quality issues or noise issues or security issues that enable you to use windows, and your windows are located effectively for air circulation, that might be perfectly adequate. And it might be just a matter of preventing air intrusion from sources that are undesirable. Did I cover that?
I think so.
Okay.
We have another one. If we install a heat pump HVAC system, would we have to replace the ducting that already exists for the current system?
You probably would not have to. It might prove desirable. It's really a question of what kind of condition the ducting is in, and by condition I mean both, is it operating well? Is it well sealed? Is it delivering air where it's needed in the right volume? And the right volume is part of the answer too. So, for example, you might have ducts that are too small or too large, or so it's one of those things that ideally you would have an expert look at and test, measure, to answer that question for you if you're considering an HVAC change out.
Great. We're almost done. Any last questions? Okay, one quick question I had, Anne, you mentioned
Sure.
trying to get all of these people together, all of your team. Do you think you get around that in some way by working with a general contractor that's really focused on this work, or is it really like you need to be involved and get everyone together?
Yeah, no, I mean, ideally, whoever your lead professional is, I personally am trained as an architect. I'm a real advocate for having a design professional involved, because I guess, and this is probably worth mentioning, that a lot of folks who are contemplating a home improvement project immediately leap to, oh, I need a contractor. Yeah, you do. You need a contractor, unless you're a fabulous DIY person, to execute the work. But there is knowledge that goes into the work that needs to be done. And sometimes that's well within the purview of a general contractor, but very often it's not. Contractors are not designers. There's a reason they're contractors and not designers. So I would encourage people to think about, whether there's a need for both of those roles in a project. Ideally, let's say you decide you do need both. I need an architect or an interior designer or a building designer, and a contractor. ideally, both of those lead parties for you would have both the desire and the experience in performing high performance work, and then they will help you find everybody else. And there might not even be a lot of everybody else, right? So I've got, one class that I teach where I talk about, well, what's the ideal team? And, in large projects, even residential projects, I worked on, very high end residential projects that involved a cast of dozens of people. That's not ideal, but it's sometimes necessary. The ideal is the smallest team that has the requisite skills and experience, right? So in this one project, a colleague I've worked with a few times is a general contractor who himself has done a lot of the design work, almost every trade. He's hyper efficiency minded. Like George is 1 in a million, right? We should all have a George, but we don't. So the next best thing is a general contractor and an architect who are, in this field and know who to go to. And, honestly, on projects I work with, that is a lot of my role. I'm a generalist. And so I will help people assemble teams on projects where I think, oh, this is complicated enough that, you're going to need some expertise. So I mentioned, for example, pools. Had a contract contract with a high-end res client a couple years ago where they wanted to have an all-electric, a heat pump heated swimming pool that operated year-round and around the clock. This is a very tall order, and it took me several attempts before I found the right person to manage that design process, that piece of, there was a much larger project involved, but pools are super tricky. So that's not something where you're going to find that person growing on trees. So it really depends on the project.
Okay, that's helpful. I think we need to wrap things up. We are over the hour. George sent a question that I will forward to Anne and ask for her response and get that to you, George. And I will ask everyone to have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you very much, Anne, for sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody, for being part of this today.